Welcome back to GEMS Podcast. I am the founder and host, Miss Genesis Amaris Kemp, and with me today is Dr. Victor Manzo Jr. And here's a bit about Dr. Vic. He is a business mindset coach, certified pediatric chiropractor, holistic practitioner, author, podcaster, and speaker. He is the author of 2 books, Rediscover Your Greatness and A Walk in the Dark. He's currently working on his 3rd book, which will be released in May, so next month, called Decoding The Matrix. He's a podcaster for 2 podcasts, The Mindful Experiment, which has over 360 episodes and has 30,000 downloads per month, and the Mindful Chiropractic Podcast, which was started in October of 2021. But what separates him is the mindset side of things. On top of the 4 things above, he goes deeper to uncover their beliefs, blocks, behaviors, habits, and patterns of thinking that prevent them from living the life or creating the business they like to experience. From there, he uses a box of tools to help reprogram the mind, reshift focus, teach spiritual truths, and bring quantum physics into the mix to unveil their true potential and then make it a reality. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Victor Manzo Jr. to GEMS Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. So let's start off with an icebreaker so we could get to know who you are personally. So you have 2 options. You could share a crazy thing that you've done in your life or a fun but interesting fact about yourself.
Interesting. Okay. I love these questions because I'm always like, what can I say? How far can I go with this? Am I going to go too far? A crazy thing what was the second question? It was a crazy thing that I like, or
a crazy thing that you've did in your life, or the second one is something fun but interesting about yourself.
Fun but interesting about myself. I am a kid at heart and a kid all the time. So what that means is I come and approach life with curiosity. Even if I know something, I'm always like literally a kid. If you see like how a 5-year-old is awed about life and going, wow, that's so cool. That's me. Like I like, somebody will be talking about something they love and I'll be like, tell me more. And they're like, this is boring stuff. I'm like, you're like, you can't use it. I'm like, I probably will never use what you're telling me, but I just think it's cool that you're telling me something that I have no clue about. So I would love to learn more just for the heck of it. So I hope that answers it a little bit.
It definitely does, because knowledge is power, and learning is exactly what we're going to do today by you sharing your expertise on your subject matter. So I know you do a lot with quantum physics. You're also a pediatric chiropractor, and then you teach spiritual components. And for those of you who are listening or watching, he's not talking about the woo-woo, but he's going to actually break down how he looks at spirituality and he pairs it with quantum physics, as well as the neuroscience, and he's going to package it up in a nice gift and put that bow on top so you could actually go challenge yourself to learn more about the subject matter expertise that he will be delivering today. So Dr. Victor, what made you get involved in the work that you're doing today?
You know, you've always heard the title, like you're the creator of your life. Everything happens through you, not to you, and all these different things. And it was one of those things where I was told it, but I that was great. I'm not the type of person where you just tell me something, I'll be like, thumbs up, let's go. I'm more the type of person, like, if you tell me that, I'm going to want to know why. Again, 5-year-old mentality. Just think of a 5-year-old. They always ask why. That's me. So it's one of those things where I'm like, well, why does that happen? How's that true? Where can we find truth? So my journey started when I was in chiropractic school in the spirituality realms, because I was a Reiki master and trainer. I studied about 12 different modalities and energy healing or energy principles, and just learning that whole world, which was very fascinating because it was giving me the depth I wanted to see. But then when I would share that with others, I didn't get the response I liked. I was getting like the woo or this, oh, that's crazy stuff, or what are you talking about? So then I was like, well, there's got to be truth to this. It's not just out there. My gut was telling me there is. So I started looking at how can I connect right brain, which is abstract. This is where we connect to our spirituality side. And then how can I bring that and bridge the gap to the left brain? which is more of a world we live in today, which is very information based. We're just flooded with information. So I was like, how can I connect the dots? And then I started hearing about quantum physics, and my background was in computer science already. I had to take a lot of physics and stuff. So not that I started that for about a year, but long story short, I was like, there's the quantum physics. And I started learning and hearing about these experiments and these theories. And I was like, man, this sounds a lot like spirituality, just phrased in a different way. And I was like, this is exactly what they're talking about. And I said, well, let me go a little further. And when I started getting into my mindset work and coaching, I started looking back at all the neuroscience and all the brain stuff that I studied as a chiropractor. And I went back to revisit all those things and say, how does the brain work from a behavioral psychological standpoint? What makes humans different from one another and all this different stuff? But I wanted to look only from the brain, not anything else. And then I started seeing neuroscience principles that tied into what quantum physics said, but also tied into what spiritual people have been saying for, or the ancient tribes have been saying for over 4,000 or 5,000 years. And that's kind of where I started doing that work to connect the dots and go, holy cow, it's always been here in front of us. And for me at least, and I was like, how did I miss this all this time? And so then that's where my work kind of started and the stuff I do.
Super cool. So it's like you took what you had and then you're like, okay, all of this stuff was already in front of me. Now it's up to me to connect the dots to see how they work together. And you mentioned the neuroscience part of it. So do you ever use NLP, like the neuro linguistics programming?
I know a little bit of it. I've studied it years ago. I never went full into it. I have friends who are like, I forget what they call it, not masters. I would call him a master of it. He's done all this program to it. But I understand the basics. I've read books on it and stuff, but I don't utilize too much of it. I probably do. Like one of my buddies, like one that I'm talking about, he one day we were talking, he's like, what kind of work, what work are you up to now? And I told him, he's like, you're doing a little bit of NLP. I'm like, yeah, I know the neural and all that stuff and how you phrase words or use words. And I'm like, but I never have done the full training of it when it comes to that.
Okay. So then with your quantum physics, I want you to explain your definition of quantum physics, because I think everyone has their own definition of it, but I want you to define it and then talk about how you pair it with the work that you're doing today, because I think that will help the listeners and viewers combat that you're not into the woo-woo, but you're into like really creating the synergies where you see that things in our life do complement one another and work together for our good.
What I love about quantum physics and what it is just looking at the most micro part of our physical world. So when you're thinking of like years ago, they used to think the atom was the smallest thing in the world. And then quantum physics comes around and says, well, guess what? We've actually discovered there's subatomic particles, even they're like bosons and quarks and all these different names that they call them. And it's way smaller than an atom that actually makes up the atom and all these different aspects. And so that's my understanding of quantum physics. When I've looked into it, it was understanding the micro world that actually plays a huge role on the macro world. And because it's kind of like in even in health in your body, the smallest thing, like your cells, when you look at every single one of them, you put them all together, eventually it makes up your body. So it's kind of looking at things from that perspective. How I utilize quantum physics in the work I do is through various things. One of the big things I'm a big component of is, as I shared earlier, you're the creator of your life, right? And so that was the one thing that opened the door for me. Well, what actually creates your life? What is the things that you have to, like, what's one of the missing links? And I know in business school, they talk a little bit about it when you go through, have a vision for your business and what's your vision of that. But nobody emphasizes, like, what's your vision of your life? What's the main vision? What's the vision of a relationship? And it's not goals. I don't want to confuse the difference, because goals comes a little sooner. Vision is like a long-term effect. It's things that you visualize with images and things like that, right? And so it's one of those aspects that you want to be able to, have that in the definition. So how does quantum physics show this? Well, I use vision because there's an experiment that came out called the observer effect, and what that does is it basically, scientists were looking to see just basically what is light? Is it a waveform, which means that's non-physical, or is it a particle, which it manifests, it's a physical element? And so what happened is they had the experiment going on, they're observing, the scientist isn't paying attention yet, and the light's in a wave particle. So like, maybe this is what it is. The researcher looks now, and all of a sudden it turns into a particle. He looks away, eventually fades back into a wave format. And they did this over and over and over. And what they found out is that whenever there's an observer looking at it, looking for the light itself, it will manifest into the particle. So we see it. As soon as we observe away, it goes away. Now, what does that mean to your life? Well, the wave particle is basically infinite potential. You have the opportunity to experience anything in your life that you want to experience. Spiritualist, ancient tradition stuff has been saying this for years, thousands of years. But the other fact is reason why I'm big on vision is because how you look at something in your life, how you want to see it from your mind's eye, not your physical eyes, but your mind's eye. Some people call it your third eye, which is right here between your eyebrows. And so when you see it from that perspective, now all of a sudden the world's going to manifest in front of you. You're just going to see just that. You can literally create your world to all of a sudden it'll become that. But you have to understand the power from this. So when you don't have a vision, a lot of people don't, you go into things, you have ambition for a business, or you have ambition for your life or a relationship or health or whatever that is, but you don't have crystal clarity of what that looks like. You don't have crystal clarity on your vision of why that's important to you. Then all of a sudden you have distractions. It's not a clear crystal picture. So that's why you don't get what you really like to experience. And notice I say like to experience. The reason why I'm big on that is because if you say desire or want, that comes from lack. That does not come from you choosing. Notice when I say I like to experience this, that is me choosing that. Where if I say, well, I want this or I desire this, well, you can already tell I don't have that. Does that kind of make sense? And so, okay. And so it's one of those things where, I utilize quantum physics to show the science that vision is critically important. And a lot of the work I do, that is what I harp on. And sometimes business owners who work with me will be like, I wanted to come to you because I saw you help someone double their profits in 6 months. You're making me focus on vision. And I'm like, this is an unorthodox approach that what you're going to get. That's where I'm like a business mindset coach. It's one of those things where the business side I'll teach, but it's the mindset I got to get right first. And so many times people wanted the business or the doing side of things. They're like, how do I get in shape? Well, how do I do this? How do I do that? That's a doing outside ourselves, which in essence, we have to turn it back to us first and get that right. And once we do it with vision and our clarity, the action steps are a lot easier.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And for those who are listening who are spiritual or religious, they always say people perish for a lack of vision and knowledge. So if you don't know what your vision is, then you're not going to be able to reverse engineer it and take the actions in order to turn those visions into realities. So, and that starts with mindset shift, as Dr. Victor was talking about, because it's like you have to take time to do the inward work. And once you do the inward work, then you are going to materialize that externally. And then that manifestation, the law of attractions, and etc., will come into you. And that's how you have that new paradigm shift, in my opinion.
Yeah, totally. It's one of those things where, like Proverbs, I think Proverbs 29:18 states, people who don't have a vision will perish. And that's just from a biblical text. And it's funny, the memes I saw where they were talking about just getting, again, know something biblical was like, David could have prayed all day, right? But eventually he had to pick up a stone and throw it at Goliath, right? And so I say that because a lot of times people hear me and they're like, oh, you just have to sit there and visualize and then everything's going to happen for you. And it's like, no, you want to do all that, right? That's like 80% of your work. And then all of a sudden focusing on being, and then the 20% is just literally just like kind of drive, like hitting GPS in your car saying, okay, this is where I'm going. And you just follow where it tells you to go. And that's just you taking the steps you need to do every single day when it comes to that. But even taking even to the spiritual side, they say that everything comes from non-physical to physical. All things in life have to happen from the mind first before they can be evolved to go from non-physical to physical. So the mind's eye, that's why it's so important to work with your mind's eye, because here's a neuroscience truth. Your brain can't tell the difference. Your brain literally cannot tell the difference what you imagine in your mind and what you see in your physical reality. It doesn't know the difference. So then why don't we use that to our power and start creating visions in our mind of what we want to experience, play those movies, get the emotions, get the senses involved. And all of a sudden, that is going to trick your mind to think, well, this is reality. And once you can do that, everything is starting to align with that. So now you'll start to experience that in your life.
Absolutely. And that goes back to one of the points that I did not mention earlier in your bio, but part of spirituality is the spiritual truths. And you mentioned that spiritual laws have been around for 5,000 to 5,000 years ago. And then how you bring the science to support these things is through the quantum physics that we highlighted briefly, the neurology and the neuroscience. So do you feel like you need to have all three in place in order to, be relevant with those spiritual truths? Quantum physics plus neurology plus neuroscience?
I believe science creates confidence. And so it's and at least that has done for me in my life, whether being a chiropractor or a coach or whatever it may be. I want to see the science just to see what are the patterns that are showing. And so, you can just be spiritual and just understand the spiritual laws, and that's it. You can go to quantum physics route and just know that. But I like to bring the science and to be like, wow, this actually all works in that. Here's the spiritual stuff. There's really just, it's like philosophy. And then it's like, well, how's that true? And that builds confidence, because then because there's going to come shortcomings. It's not like you get all this. Let's say you nail this all down. You're like, I got this in my head. I can see it. Well, let me tell you, it's not going to work smooth. You're going to hit challenges. You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to question, is this really true? That I'm not seeing this work. And because unfortunately, we live in time-space reality. So we have to go through time and space in order to get to what we're trying to create. Imagine if you had, and I love that design, even though sometimes I'm creating new things, I'm like, I want this to happen faster. Even I still say this, but it's one of those things where it's like, I have to remind myself, I'm going through time and space. I'm in this dimension. I have to understand this is how it works. Because imagine if you had a negative thought, or let's say someone cuts you off and you're really mad and you want to just like take them out. Imagine that happens instantly. You'd be like, no, I wish I need some time, space, or someone who really annoys you. So, or anything in your own life. So there's a beautiful process to this. There's always a plus and minus to everything. And again, it's just how you're looking at it and so forth.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, because I do like the time and space analogy, because I think that's something that we are all faced with is time, and then what space are we in? And I think that space could be mental space, physical space, emotional space, or even that spiritual space. And that is what is going to drive us to get to the next level once you begin to evaluate and analyze all of those, because then it goes back to the wavelength. What wavelength are you traveling at? Do you agree there?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Nikola Tesla said that everything is a vibration, frequency, and energy. And once we look at the universe and life in that way, we will expand and grow exponentially faster than what we've done, even as fast as we are now, because you're bringing up frequency. I'll just share this. It's or wavelength, and same thing. It's one of those things where like you don't achieve anything in life or experience anything in life unless you're vibing at that level. That's pure law of attraction or law of vibration 101. Is that like attracts like, and so you can't just shift vibrations as fast. So you have to like do the work, remove those blockages that are holding you back, or I call them psychological barriers. They can be your ceiling, that glass ceiling. You can see through the ceiling. It's just, there's something holding you back. And that's where getting into the mindset, getting into beliefs, getting into your value system and the habits of the things you do. Usually those are, from my experience and my own personal journey, and then also working with clients, that's usually where the most, like when I can get to that point and remove some of those or change those belief systems, then all of a sudden that ceiling has been removed. And now we can work up to the next level. And as we continue to raise our vibe, then all of a sudden we can achieve and experience more of the life that we like.
Yep. Living life on your terms without any mental roadblocks, and just really making sure that you're tapping into your full self, because I feel like so many people are not tapping into their full self because they're either letting traumas from childhood spring into their adulthood. They're allowing environmental factors to control where they could go, those limiting beliefs, those imposter syndromes, and etc. And until they begin to work on those things, they're not going to really be able to get where they want to go because of the limitations, and people cannot see that. So that's why they say you should partner with somebody who has been where you are and has superseded that. And life is a partnership. None of us were created to do life alone, but we were created to do life together.
Amen to that. I couldn't agree more with that one. Couldn't agree more with that one. I had a thought and it ran away when you were talking, but if it comes back, I'll mention it. But no, it really is. I mean, you nailed it on the head, and it's just doing that kind of work.
And then, so as we begin to wind down, Dr. Vic, because I want to be mindful of your time. And I was like, man, 30 minutes is flying so fast today. So I want you to hit on your podcast briefly, the Mindful Experiment. So, what drove you to creating this podcast, and what can people look forward to when they tune in?
Love it. Thank you for asking. It's the mindful experiment came up because I was in the health world. I had a podcast in 2012 called Wellness Smart Radio, and it was all about health topics. I think I did like 100 episodes there, and then I got away from it. And then it was just called like this. There was an annoying noise in the knowing voice in the back of my head that kept saying like, "You need to get into mindset stuff. You need it. This is what you love doing. You work with your patients on this. You're like, you need to do something." So 2018 March, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to, I wrote a book called my first book, Rediscover Your Greatness. And after that was getting ready to be out, I'm like, I'm starting a podcast. I'm going to do the whole mindset thing. And it's going to be about life. My podcast is all about the mind and just life. And life is an experiment, right? So I'm going through the eyes of the mind to create the experiment. And how do we learn from other people? I share topics every week and I have interviews every week. And it's one of those things where we're talking about stuff that relates. I mean, I've had people from business to people from how to be more intimate with self and partners and all in between and that and above, because there's always an element we can learn that can help us level up in our life. And the whole concept is to really turn in and experience our, I want to say true potential, just your, whatever you want to create for your life, like whatever you choose that gives you the most fulfillment. Here's how you can do it.
I like that, because then it complements the work that you're doing with your clients. And then if someone is like on the fence about working with you, you could be like, well, check out my podcast and see if you resonate with anything. And if you do, then let's work together. So it's like you're giving them a taste of you in a non-coaching sense. And then they could, come on over and integrate with you in a business sense. So you could help them, level up and get to that level.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't say that was my idea in the beginning. I always tell people when they ask me why I started a podcast, I said it was for selfish reasons. And they're like, you really say that? I'm like, well, you got to think about it. I get to interview people I'll never meet that are doing great things and they're sharing their gifts. I get to pick their brain on what interests me that I'm like, and of course, I always think of my listeners too, but I'm like, I'll be asking questions I'm curious about. And then I said, the benefit thing is the person who I'm interviewing, they get cross promoted to everything. So they win. And then also the listeners get to gain an experience from what I'm asking. So I'm like, but it was literally from that point, that is one of the reasons why I start, like one of the aspects of why I started it. But now, like you were sharing, now when it comes to somebody who's like, I never heard of you before, I want to know more about you, I'll be like, 360 something episodes, have fun. Let me know when you want to have a chat. If you like what I have to say, just look for my individual ones that I do every other week or every once a week. I'm like, just look for those and you'll get to know a little bit about my pulse and who I am.
Amazing. And Dr. Vic, I want you to leave the listeners and viewers with your call to action for this segment.
Awesome. So you guys can follow and check up everything I'm up to and what I'm doing at empoweryourrelly.com. There on the website, you can get a free ebook that I've written. It's only a couple pages. It's not that crazy and long, on the power of visualization. This will go through a couple studies that are mind-blowing in talking about, we think about the doing side so much. And then the whole purpose of writing that ebook was just to share a concept of how if we just tap into the mind, we can really, it's a game changer in what comes to creating our life. And there you can find, again, there's also stuff that you can find in there with my podcast, my blog, coaching, all that good stuff that you can see at the website.
Amazing. So your website again is www.empoweryourreality.com. And from there, they could find out your social media handles and all the things that you're up to.
Yes, ma'am.
So Dr. Vic, I want to thank you so much for coming on GEMS podcast and just sharing your knowledge with us. You always have a space here anytime you want to come back and drop more gems. And listeners and viewers, I encourage you to share and subscribe to this podcast. And don't forget to leave a review. We are on 40 plus platforms. Connect with us on YouTube for all things video content by putting in at Gems with Genesis Amaris Kemp. And we are currently ranked in the top 3% globally per www.listennotes.com. And that's out of 2.8 million podcasts. So top 3% globally. So until we chat next time, peace. love, and lots of blessings. Have yourself an amazing day and go learn something. I challenge you to tap into those quantum physics, pay attention to your neuroscience, and be where you want to be and do the work in order to get there, because it's not always going to be easy, but you have to challenge yourself to jump over those hurdles. I believe in you. Dr. Vic believes in you. And anytime you need help, just tap in with one of us.